Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the Blessed Noble and fully self-awakened one. So this is the inaugural talk around verses of the Dhammapada, and I've chosen what is probably the most famous of them all. I shall chant it in Pali first, just to give it that Eastern flavour. Nahi verena verani samantida kudachanam averena cha samanti esa dhammo sanantano. As usually translated as, hatreds never cease through hatred in this world, through love alone they cease. This is an eternal law. So this is basically a statement of non-violence. Now, with each of these Dhammapada verses, there comes a little story. So I'm very fortunate. I have this book written by Sri Dhammananda, who was a Sri Lankan monk in Malaysia. He's died now. And what he's done for us very kindly is he's reduced the stories to something fairly manageable. So I shall read this as a sort of an example of the way they would have thought, or the way it was built up from perhaps a smaller original occasion. So it's a bitter feud through various existences. Now, once there lived a householder whose wife was barren. Being unable to bear a child and afraid that she would be mistreated by her husband and her mother-in-law, she herself selected and arranged for her husband to marry another woman. But on 2 occasions, as soon as she knew the second wife was pregnant, the barren wife gave her food mixed with drugs, causing her to have miscarriages. On her 3rd pregnancy, the fruitful wife kept it to herself without informing the barren wife. But when the latter came to know of it, she again caused a miscarriage. Eventually, the second wife died in childbirth. Before her death, the unfortunate woman was filled with hatred and vowed vengeance on the barren wife and her future offspring. Thus, the feud was started. Among their later existences, the two were born as a hen and a cat, a doe and a leopardess, and finally as the daughter of a nobleman in Savatthi and an ogress. One day, the demon was in hot pursuit of the nobleman's daughter and her baby. When the lady heard that the Buddha was giving a religious discourse at the Jetavana monastery, she fled to him and placed her son at his feet for protection. The demon was thus prevented from entering the monastery. She was later called in, and both lady and ogress were admonished by the Buddha. The Buddha told them about their past feud as rival wives and how they had been harboring hatred towards each other and killing each other's offspring through their various lifetimes. They were made to see that hatred could only cause more hatred, and it could only cease through friendship, understanding, and goodwill. Both realized their mistakes and, on the admonition of the Buddha, made their peace with each other. The Buddha then requested the woman to hand over her son to the ogress. Fearing for the safety of her son, she hesitated, but because of her devotion and confidence in the Enlightened One, she handed over her son as directed. The child was warmly received by the ogress. After kissing and caressing the child tenderly, like her own very son, the ogress handed over the child back to his mother. As a result of this episode, there was much goodwill on both sides. So I don't know, maybe there was a kernel incident there where a desperate husband maybe went to the Buddha and said, my 2 wives are at each other all day, can you help? and then it built up from there. An ogress, of course, is a sort of nasty female Shrek, I suppose. But the story is basically about what happens when you react with hatred or anger to somebody else who's being angry or hateful. Now, what we have to do is convince ourselves that this is true. And I think the place to start is within ourselves. So if you think about what happens within us when somebody is angry with us or has a hateful attitude towards us. See, the response is immediately, isn't it, to react with that anger, to react with hatred. And you can see that this is just going to create more hatred and more anger, because the other person now has something to chew on. And as they respond with more hatred and anger, so we respond with more hatred and anger. So that's a never-ending process, which is just going to lead to a forest fire. And it's really catching that within us, that often for no reason we might just dislike somebody. And that manifests in the way we look at them, the way we actually talk to them. And then we wonder why they're coming back to us, not recognizing that inside us we have a very hateful attitude towards this person. It could be because of their political stance, their religious stance. It could be for any reason. It could be just the way they look sometimes. And then and hatred is a sort of generalized attitude that passes through time. Anger, of course, is just a flare-up which tends to die away. Of course, you can bring it back to mind over and over again, when we're daydreaming. But basically, these two things, these two mental heart reactions, or something that we build up within ourselves, they're looking for something to, really chew on. And when the other person actually reacts to us with anger or with further hatred, then we ourselves find a reason to just continue. And so the feud begins. Now, there's an incident in the Buddha's life where the dastardly Devadatta set a wild elephant on him. Devadatta wanted to reform the order, to go back to its original ascetic practice, rag robes, live in just a shelter made from twigs or trees and a banana leaf put over it, really sort of go right back to those early ascetic days. Of course, the Buddha wouldn't accept that, because the people he was getting who were ordained then just weren't really of that caliber. So he set this wild elephant on the Buddha. Now, the Buddha, when he saw the elephant coming, raised his hand. So it's known as the Abhaya posture, the fearless posture. Now, that's the first thing that we have to engender towards somebody who's hateful or who's angry with us. Somehow there has to be a feeling that, they cannot destroy you. They cannot overwhelm you. Right? There has to be that sort of internal strength within us. Now, that might not be there, in which case, we'll react in a way which is undermining ourselves. We'll either run or hide or in some way give in to the person who's being angry with us. So this is a learning process. And the thing is to build up a certain righteousness within ourselves, so that we can stand steady within ourselves, a sort of an assertiveness about ourselves within the world. And that's difficult, because, it's difficult. So the elephant comes towards him and he holds his hand up. Now, this hand is sort of also a way of him expressing his love towards the elephant, a non-violent love towards it, asking the elephant to calm down. So it's a feeling he's sending out, a sort of beam of love. And the elephant does slow down and finally pays obeisance. Now, whether we want to believe these stories or not isn't really the point. The point is that we can overcome anger, other people's hatred, by non-reactivity and this idea of goodwill. Friendliness might not be there, but definitely we can have goodwill. Now, when somebody comes to us with that attitude of hatred and anger, it's because something is unhappy within them, and they are expressing that outwards as an aggressive mental state, an aggressive mood. So it's a case of recognizing that. So what might we do if somebody is like that towards us? Well, we might be quick enough to envisage this hand so that we're receiving the emotional state, right? And that's being taken care of. And even though we might feel inside us a certain anger growing or a certain fear growing, it's as though the hand is also guarding us against further reaction, because it's holding the other person at a distance. Now, in order to prevent us falling into the emotion that we're engendering in ourselves, if we lift our attention and pay attention to what they're saying, in other words, to put the attention on the ear rather than the heart, then of course what we're doing is we're being compassionate. We're actually taking a position that maybe, if I can get in touch with the hurt that sits behind their hatred or their anger, it might undermine it. Now, that's an act of compassion, an act of trying to understand where the person is coming from. And hopefully the other person will suddenly recognize that actually you're listening to them. And that often undermines a person's anger and hatred, that finally, you're actually paying attention to what their problem is. And that often, as I say, that often just assuages the whole situation. And then through discussion, etc., there can be a healing of the situation. And that's definitely one way that you can approach a situation where a person is angry or is hateful towards you. So I think we've been through it there, I think. Yeah. So we have this story of the ogress and these three qualities of friendship, understanding, you see, that's the compassion, and goodwill. And we have the story of the Buddha overcoming the elephant. So here we have some stories to support us, but also through our own internal investigation as to the way we behave when somebody is when we're angry and the other person's angry. Before we know it, we're into some sort of rage. So this whole attitude of non-violence is of absolute importance in our lives, so that we can heal our own hearts of that reactivity of anger and hatred. So if we go back to this little phrase, it's very simple. We can translate it as hatred or anger never comes to end with the reaction of hatred and anger. Not in this world, not ever, not at any time. And it's only through goodwill, through understanding, compassion, that they come to cease. So this is an eternal law. This is an absolute law. I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, that they have not caused even greater confusion, and that by your devotion to the practice, you'll be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later.